Hello everyone, welcome to episode 2 of the Partners Brief. Today we have with us Mr. Gautam Narasimhan, who is the managing partner of the Singapore office of A&O Shearman, which is a leading multinational law firm in the world.
Thank you very much, Sanidhi. And I wasn't, this is a surprise that when I came to NLSIU to do the IFCC course, but I'm excited to be part of this podcast. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. So, diving right into our podcast, our first question is about the career that you have built that we all look up to. So, could you please tell us about from your journey in NLSIU Bangalore to where you are right now, the uniqueness it holds and how it all happened?
Thank you. That's you can be rest assured. I don't think there's anything unique. All of us have unique careers and unique journeys, I'm sure. But I'm happy to share, how sort of I've gone about the last 26 years, which is I graduated from the NLSIU in Bangalore in 2000, and I've had, I'd say that in hindsight, I've been very privileged to have worked with a number of absolutely interesting people, made a lot of friends along the way, and ended up working as a practicing lawyer, studying and then working in New York. Spent 5.5 years in London, spent a little bit of time in Hong Kong, a little bit of time in Jakarta, and then these days, quite well settled in Singapore. So so it's something that I'm very grateful for, these experiences. I don't know how unique it is, but I think it's been a journey that part of it I stumbled into without too much planning. Took some opportunities as and when they arose, took some risks along the way, but a lot of it also driven by personal choices. Particularly the move from London to come to Singapore was, in some ways, both emotionally and from a family perspective, to be closer to my parents who were aging at that stage, and so I'm glad I got the opportunity to cater to my family needs as well along the way. So I think that's sort of part of the journey. It's been a very exciting process of learning, and working in 4 different financial markets, and that's something that has been very enriching.
That's really great to hear, sir. I mean, it really gives us students some confidence that, okay, you will eventually know what you want and eventually you'll figure it out, because I feel like the way you said, you have stumbled upon opportunities. It wasn't very pre-planned. You have taken it as the life came. So I feel like that's a really nice thing to hear for us. So you mentioned the multi-jurisdictional career. And you'd mentioned that you've been in different countries like US, UK, Hong Kong, Singapore, Jakarta. So right now, because you are settled in Singapore, I would like to ask you, did you see any changes that are unique to maybe Singapore that you hadn't experienced in other jurisdictions, other countries? How is it different?
I mean, it's a very good question. Singapore, where I've been based now for 20 years, has had a complete evolutionary change in how it's positioned itself as a major financial center. I mean, Singapore genuinely is, and Singapore law is genuinely, in some ways, a true alternative to English law in this part of the world. I think I see it as a genuine tool for international law, international commerce. So Singapore, as a lawyer, being a lawyer in Singapore has been probably the best time to be a lawyer in Singapore has been in the last 10-15 years. A number of changes have happened in Singapore. The government has brought out, and you have to give it to the government in Singapore, because a lot of it is planned in terms of conceptualizing change, but the execution is second to none. I mean, the precision and the execution, and to a large extent the fairness with which the execution happens, and the finesse is very unique to Singapore. So if you ask me what is it about Singapore that gives it a uniqueness. It is something that's very unique to Singapore. It is a country, a city-state that has, that obviously is a hub for a lot of work. There's a lot of work that goes on in Singapore, but it is the hub for work that happens in Indonesia, in Malaysia, now in Vietnam, and increasingly, for A&O Shearman, the firm that I work in, a lot of the India work also gets hubbed out of Singapore, right? When I started off in London, there was some of it was being done out of London, but over time, I think, especially in international finance, partly and substantially because of the role that Singapore has as a financial hub, a lot of the India offshore work has come from Singapore. Singapore is the largest source of foreign direct investment into India. I mean, in fact, I think is larger than all other jurisdictions combined. So, Singapore has a very unique place for India and the practice of law in India. Singapore also has become the most prolific center for arbitration and India contributes a pretty significant portion of arbitration disputes through the arbitral institutions in Singapore, which operate at a very high level. So I feel, I'll be honest, I think in some ways when I left London, initially I got seconded from London to Singapore in 2003, ended up doing some amount of corporate M&A work in Indonesia, and then when I wanted to move back to Singapore, I instead with my old firm went to Hong Kong, spent some time in Hong Kong and then came back to Singapore. Singapore has been for me it came up through my career, and I've been very fortunate that I had the chance to grow my career in Singapore as a lawyer. Partly also because it's always been at the forefront of change.
Understood, sir. So this is a follow-up from your answer just now. So where would you place, like you had mentioned previously, India does contribute a lot of market to, especially A&O Singapore office, you said we do. So I just wanted to know, where is India placed in this macroeconomic situation? And you had also talked about the government's role and how it really incubates this change and really catalyzes through its reforms, policies, etc. And where do you see Indian regulations, the changes that are happening today in India's economy? And where does, compared to Singapore, so what do we have to learn and where does India stand in all of this? Your take on that?
And I wouldn't necessarily compare, right? These are very different, very, very different things, right? India as a standalone, as a economy, is a major economy. It is, I think, I'm not saying anything that everyone knows this. It is the largest, it's the largest major economy, growing at 7-8% or more for a substantial, sustained growth, right? And there is still a massive amount of untapped growth. I mean, the equity markets have done incredibly well over the years, partly also because of the penetration of the retail sector here, which is a new thing in India, right? So I think therefore India is on a journey of its own, right? Singapore is obviously a city state, a population of 6 million, so you can't compare it to India, right? So, but it is a hub. The way we see it, it is a very good, very well-tested hub for India investments. I think the treaty protections, the legal regime in Singapore help with the India growth story. And part of what we do as a firm is to help clients maximize the benefits of the ecosystem that both India and Singapore provide. We do not, as you're aware, and I'm sure many of your audience will be aware, we don't practice Indian law. We don't have an office in India, and we don't hold out as practicing Indian law. But we work with the very talented legal community here on transactions that require international legal involvement. In various capacities, whether it's in disputes, in transactional work, regulatory work, etc.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So my next question would be about the culture within international law firm circle, because you have experienced London offices culture and Singapore offices culture. What are the uniquenesses, the similarities, or the differences they hold? If you could please elaborate on that.
I mean, just to clarify, I did not work in Allen & Overy in London. I started in, my journey was, I started with Clifford Chance in London, which was the head office. In some ways similar to, to A&O, as it was called then. Then from Clifford Chance, I moved to the London office of Simpson Thacher, which is again a major US law firm, and spent some time with them in Hong Kong as well. Thereafter, I worked for 4 years with Latham & Watkins. This was in 2006 through 2010. Again, a major international law firm, and for the last 16 years I've been with A&O in Singapore. So my experience with A&O Shearman has been largely in Singapore and Southeast Asia. But I think in terms of as a firm, what I genuinely, and this is not something that I say because I'm speaking to you, but what I genuinely believe, we are a pretty joined up international law firm. It's ultimately, there are firms that have, loose alliances, right? And there are firms that are joined up international firms. A&O falls in the latter category. So the culture across various offices carry a lot of commonality in terms of our value system, our strategy, business strategy. We are not a law firm that only focuses on the major Western financial markets. So there are some firms who have only focused on the US or London. Allen & Overy, by virtue of its history, is always been to be international. So you may not know it, but we've been in Dubai for more than 50 years now, right? We've been in Singapore for more than 30 years, in fact 35 years. Similarly in Japan, and we've celebrated 15 years in Vietnam, in Indonesia. So the firm's DNA is to have an international orientation to it, and that requires a value system that is a shared value system. We are, even though we have a huge number of partners now by virtue of growing, etc., I can tell you there's a number of partners. I would know a number of the partners because we get opportunities to collaborate, work. So there's a lot of glue in the partnership and in the firm, which transcends offices, whether you work in London and Singapore. And the role for junior lawyers, trainees, when we have trainees in Singapore, they spend time in London. London trainees spend time in Singapore or other international offices. So there's sort of, that is very much ingrained in how we are, how we think of ourselves.
Yeah.
So the cultures, there'll be some, local cultural differences, I'm sure, but I think it's a very diversified. It's a very it is a firm that values inclusivity. Yeah. I mean, I've felt it, in my own journey with the firm.
That's a really great answer, sir. I really liked how you had really weaved both of the branches of your firm with like the same values that the firm shares. That's really great to hear. Another question. This is a bit of a query in all of our students' minds. And whenever we interact with the seniors who do make it through the vacation schemes, we do get, when we ask, obviously we're really curious, and when we ask about these firms, the work-life balance there, we are told that, oh my God, it is really fun. Like the work-life balance in international firms is better than what you might find in Indian domestic firms. So I just wanted to ask you your take on that. What do you think the differences in the work-life balance look like? And is it true that there is a more balanced approach in the international circle than we have in the domestic circle?
Okay, I have to say this. It's a loaded question, but I have not worked in India. I finished I literally, even before I went to my convocation ceremony, I flew out for my master's, and I've worked almost, in fact, my entirety of my legal career. I've obviously done internships when I was a law student here. I think to answer this question, I think you also need to realize that if we talk about change that has happened in the international legal firms, the change that's happened in the Indian legal sector is seismic. It's anything that is beyond what has happened elsewhere, and that's a genuine testament to how the economy has grown. When I started out, when I was graduating back in 2000, some of the major firms here were less than 100 lawyers. Today, you have 150 partners, forget about lawyers, right? So, and there have been some very good examples of law firms that have, law firms have evolved here as well, and there's a lot of good faith underpinning the growth of Indian law firms. I think I've interacted with a number of senior lawyers, and I genuinely think, it's wrong to stereotype, a work-life balance as belonging to one, part of the world or not. It depends on, the evolution happening in every legal market. And I genuinely feel that Indian law firms are coming of age. They have processes that are changing, and the quality of work that Indian law students get with Indian law firms is fantastic. It's first rate. I would say that, they go toe to toe with international firms on, often on many, in areas where, they're very good at. Obviously, there are some areas which, where some international firms have invested and have spent more years doing, so they'll be better at it, right? So I wouldn't necessarily say the work-life balance here is particularly different to work-life balance elsewhere. I think, again, take the example of my firm. We've been around for 80 odd years, and when you combine us with Shearman and Sterling, which is the firm we merged with, that we have a legacy of 150 years. So and that legacy and the institutions do have been in place for a while, so those continue on. There are firms in India which are quite young and growing at a ferocious pace, and when growth happens, there'll be obviously systems need to be upgraded, systems need to be calibrated to reflect the change, and that is happening as we speak. So, but I tell you this, I say this kind of as a genuine statement that there's a lot of good faith among leaders in India, in the Indian law firms, to try to not just grow the top line and obviously run a profitable business, but also to care about the quality of work that young associates join them for. And a lot of times, there are firms where there is a strong anchor partner who set up the firm, or a promoter who set up the firm, but that's also their life's work, right, that they have put in. So they are involved, trying to make it work and try to improve. So I have a lot of positivity about how Indian law firms have grown. I'm not trying to sugarcoat any of this. But obviously, like any other part of the world, if you look at Chinese law firms, they are growing significantly. And, when growth happens, systems will need to respond, right? And one of that will be about how, work-life balance, as you describe it. That's a term we should discuss what that means, but, sort of the ways of working is probably the better way to do it, is, how that is catered for. And, I'll tell you the one thing which is post-COVID, which is a reality that all of us are still experiencing, is the whole philosophy of how we work changed as a consequence of COVID, right? I'm particularly in Singapore, we went through periods of lockdown where people just work from home. That culture of hybrid working, again, is something that a lot of people are still trying to get their hands around all over the world, right? Whether it's in New York, whether it's in London, and I'm sure that's the same issue in India as well.
Understood. Understood, sir. That really gives us insights into how there are constant, like everything is in a flux and there are constant changes, and how law firms need to adapt themselves. And other thing that you'd mentioned, obviously, like you're mentioning, the changes that are happening in the law firm sector in general, everywhere around the world. In 1991, you had mentioned about the economic reforms that have happened in India. So I feel like right now the next big change that is happening currently as we speak is obviously artificial intelligence, and it is really like penetrating all sectors of work, and we as students also do get our hands on it. And I just wanted to ask you, more often than not, we find ourselves in like a moral dilemma where is the right balance between using artificial intelligence, and where are we becoming extremely dependent on it and not able to really develop our own thinking pathways into decoding a problem, etc., which is very important for us lawyers. So what do you think is the right balance, and especially when the change is something as inevitable as artificial intelligence, and when the law firms are also really adapting their ways into it? How do we students get our hands on those tools, and how do we work with them fruitfully?
So I'll say two things. One is, you mentioned 1991 financial.
Yeah.
I mean, that is economic reforms that is driven by the government.
Yeah.
And I think just on that, India has, in my view, sitting outside in, India has, over the last 25 years, or 35 years rather, gone through a lot of regulatory changes. Okay, and what I like about what I see is that some of these changes, like the IBC, for instance, when it first came out, obviously there were lots of teething problems. There's an acceptance to try to fix it. Now, whether that works out or not is still a, TBD. But I think there's a lot of regulatory changes that have happened, right? Which is driven largely by the state, right? AI is not driven by the state, right? It is sort of the unleashing of human evolution, in my view, right? It has just happened. It's taken the whole world both by surprise and by shock. Yeah. I maybe am a bit more sanguine about the changes that AI will bring. I don't think AI, I genuinely believe that AI is not going to be able to replace 100% of any job, right? But any job will have a component of AI, and in some ways, I think this is more an issue not just for junior lawyers, but actually people who have been, practicing for a long time, for us to actually become more conversant with AI. It's your people who are coming into the profession now at least are forewarned by what AI can achieve. People who are already in the profession need to rapidly respond and tool up. Yeah. The way it's affected me personally, I use AI, and I'm fascinated by the tools that AI provides. As a transactional lawyer, it is hugely additive into the efficiency of how we can execute transactions, even in terms of domain research. Obviously that there's a number of AI tools that help us with research, but I think if you ask me as a lawyer, you still need to be a damn good substantive lawyer. Okay, AI will make you focus on becoming a better substantive lawyer, because a lot of what lawyering does involve, and it does involve a lot of procedural familiarity, getting process management, right? Now, process management is essential, but it's also probably not intuitively the most interesting aspect, but it's essential. It can be interesting if you focus on the efficiency. So AI will help with process efficiency. That's a given. Yeah, it will help with administrative efficiency, and we are seeing that. I'm already seeing that, right? But what AI is not going to do is it can postulate a solution, look at a problem and speculate about potential solutions, but you will still need to stress test the solution. You need to know the law. You need to know what is right and wrong. And for me, a lot of law is the term you use. It puts you in a moral dilemma. I also think to be a lawyer eventually has to have a moral compass of fairness, in my view, of right versus wrong, and of expediency and relevance. These are value judgments, right? And that require a sound mind and a good heart, and all of that. Now, I'm not entirely sure AI can supplement all of that, right? It can help with some of the thought process, but the judgment calls eventually will have, which is why I genuinely think for law students, this is a wake-up call to be really conversant with first principles of law. You need to know the law, right? So that if tomorrow you ask Harvey or Claude or one of the other new friends that pop up in the AI world, you're not blindly following that, because they may be wrong. And I have had situations where I've asked questions where I was like, no, this cannot be right, because I actually know the answer, having had to research it from scratch. Yeah. So my I wouldn't say advice, but my honest kind of conversation with young lawyers, young law students is, don't take your eye off becoming a really good lawyer. That's going to be what is going to get value.
Understood, sir. That actually makes so much sense, and it does really put things into perspective for us and give us some amount of clarity in navigating the situation. Talking about the future, how do you see the next couple of years in terms of the changes that are going to happen in Indian legal sector and its relationship with foreign firms and foreign legal sectors, especially Singapore?
I think it's going to be a process of constant change. Can't be one. I mean, I think the Indian economy will continue to grow, in my view. I mean, it has to. There's a lot of potential. I genuinely think why are we so sure that the Indian growth story will continue is because India is investing in institutions. The efficacy and quickness of the institutions is always going to be challenging. And to that, I think AI will help with a lot of unclogging of that, in my view, which is a good thing. But I don't see if you're asking me what is the next big thing, my practice is focused on international finance, right? Recently, there's been some pretty big blockbuster changes that have happened in the debt space, with the ECB regulations changing, the onshore acquisition financing regulations changing. That's a very interesting change that has happened in the corporate legal ecosystem. I think that is one that could be an engine for growth and opportunities for the international ecosystem to look at opportunities in India. I also think that, obviously, there are various aspects of law that are constantly being upgraded, changed. I think the AI, the information technology linked legal changes will also be quite profound. It may not be unique only to Singapore vis-a-vis India, but I think it will be very important, people practicing with an India focus, to be alive to the changes in the debt regulations, the equity markets, which India has done very well. That will, in my view, that will be, that is, the retail sector has come in, that will continue to grow. I think the dispute resolution process will, with arbitration, teething issues, but arbitration and ADR will be again another massive focus. I think, there's a lot of areas that infrastructure, data centers, which is massive. India still, has a lot of potential in that space. There's going to be a huge amount of, and Singapore, being in Singapore is quite fortunate for us vis-a-vis India, because it is in some ways the natural offshore jurisdiction. I mean, Mauritius is an offshore jurisdiction where, which has covered India very, very well. Singapore is today the largest FDI investor, right? So of course, all of these changes will matter, but it's going to be incremental.
Makes sense, sir. Taking you a little back to when you started your masters. So before you started your masters at the NYU, so did you have it in your mind that you wanted to start a career in international firm, or did it just happen? And because we also are in the process of applying for vacation schemes and trying out our own opportunities at the international firms, what would your advice be for students who are in the process of making these applications? And what was your journey during your masters?
So I'll be absolutely honest, and I'm not trying to give this just to give you a soundbite. I didn't know anything about international law firms when I left. I mean, I finished my graduation in 2000. The only focus was to get a scholarship to do an LLM in a good university, and that was a single-minded focus. What came next, I had no idea. I had it in my mind at that stage that if I could afford it, I would like to go and join the bar in Delhi, which as a litigating lawyer, that was a fascination that I had. I still have sometimes dabble in that in Singapore, but I mean, so it wasn't planned. The advice, in hindsight, right? Then I basically then joined an international firm as a fresh associate, and so I've been like I told you earlier, it just bounced around without any aggressive planning, right? Just took the opportunities, and it's, I've been grateful that some of it worked out, some of it didn't. That's life. But I find myself here in Singapore. If one sort of, people ask me this with sort of graduating students from law schools here. Of course, the vacation scheme, which still is given by some firms, is a great entry point to the training contract. I think it's not just important for the law schools and law students here, but it's actually very important to the international firms, because hiring from a diverse pool of talent is really what makes excellence and quality assurance happen, right? Because you can't, if you were just hiring from one pool, you're not going to get the opportunity to widen your horizons on what the opportunities are. And I think a lot of vacation schemes, trainees over the years, I think A&O Shearman has been doing the vacation schemes now for 16 years or more. In fact, it started in 2000. In fact, the first training program started by the Magic Circle firms was in 2000, 2001, 2002, and that continues. There are a number of firms who do that, and Indian law students who have gone to international firms, I would say, again, without trying to generalize or stereotype, have done very well, very well. In London, if you look at sort of the private equity left fin market, there's a number of Indian law students who have done very well. Arbitration, we've got some very successful partners in arbitration in London, in Singapore, elsewhere, who have done very well. So I think there's a lot to be proud of for Indian law students who have gone and joined partnerships and become market leaders in foreign markets, including in New York. I would say this though, that the time when I left India to now, today, Indian law firms today are, they are so big, they are so, they are very well placed to be a good training ground for lawyers. They do high quality work. There are some very good partners in Indian law firms who really become the people who have created this market. So I would actually in some ways advise people to not rush for an LLM, but do a year or two, understand what you like, because you shouldn't go in with any preconceived notions. Oh, I only want to do international trade, international finance, M&A. I mean, you don't know. It's a function of the mentor you get, the opportunities you get, the training you get, your work colleagues. You spend a huge amount of time working, whether you get along with them. That will feed into your choices. Yeah. So you need to have an open mind, and I would recommend people to start. I mean, if I was to advise myself about this, I would say spend a year at least working in India before you decide to go abroad.
Makes sense. Makes sense. That is also the advice that I've heard when we had some discussions about LLMs, that, okay, working 2 years in a law firm in India really puts it in perspective what you like, what you're gravitating towards, the kind of, and that makes your LLM more fruitful because you're always you already like have some kind of idea of, oh, maybe this is interesting to me.
100%.
No,
I agree.
Following from your previous answer, you'd mentioned that a bit of your plan obviously was, okay, maybe I want to come back, work as a litigation lawyer in Delhi. That was very interesting for me to hear. So what is your take on the litigation in India and the litigation sector in general? Like following.
Singapore is a unique legal market. It's a very good, serviced by an incredibly talented pool of lawyers. India is a unique legal market. It's a massive legal market. I think the velocity of litigation work in India, the number of cases that lawyers get here is huge. It's just, and there is still huge pendency, right? And so, I mean, I was interested in litigation because I was a mooter. In my years in law school, I also represented India in the Phillips Jessup Moot Court competition, etc., which I really enjoyed. I also did a couple of internships in the Supreme Court, which I absolutely enjoyed. But I also realized when I graduated from law school that I needed a sustenance which is I needed I didn't have the ability to rely on to get. I mean, maybe if I was a little bit less risk averse, I would have probably taken the leap. But I felt I needed to have a source of income which was a bit more stable. And I think litigation, the traditional practice of bar then, 26 years ago, it could have been challenging, but I did not investigate it as much as I probably felt. But honestly, in some ways, which is why I told you it's important to have an open mind, because the notions we carry about it's good to have an idea of what you want to do, but frankly, a lot of times, I certainly felt at the end of my LLM, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I just was, running a race, and then the sort of ability to step back and see what you actually like doing. I hadn't spent enough time on that, being very candid, and I don't think I spent enough time on that even when I started as a lawyer. But as I started working on areas that I felt confident in and interested in, and I started liking those areas, right? So I've had the ability to do different areas of law. I've done restructuring, I've done M&A, I've done capital markets, a little bit of capital markets, IPOs back in the day. Now I do mainly banking, finance, and private credit work. So you have to give yourself the chance to keep learning, and that makes it interesting. And I'm not saying this as a philosophical statement, but I don't have any regrets that I still keep an eye on some amount of contentious work. I still get involved if I can. It's interesting. Negotiations with lawyers on transactions are also interesting. So there's shades of what I wanted to do which manifest in what I do, right? But like I said, I think there wasn't any huge amount of planning involved in where I ended up.
Makes sense, sir. So my one last question is about, so more often than not, whenever we do our internships, we do stumble upon situations that the law school does not prepare us for, that we do not get an idea just by sitting in a classroom for. So I just wanted to ask you, were there any things, obviously I'm sure there are a lot of things, but if you had to tell us a few things that we do end up only learning in our working career that maybe your LLM and your journey at NLSIU did not prepare you for. So what was the one thing that was a challenge that you learned and overcame in your career, working career?
Okay, I'll tell you this. I think law school and the study of law prepares you with the notion of how grand the profession can be. Yeah. When you start, especially in a big law firm like I did, as a trainee, you realize that you're literally the smallest cog in the wheel there. Yeah. And so what it doesn't prepare you for is a bit of humility. And you learn it, you know. I had to learn it the hard way in some ways. But I think we all want to do super interesting work. There is a period where it's like a team. If big law, if you work in big law, but also any law, it's like you're part of a team. And you will start as the junior most, no matter how talented you think you are. The first few years of legal practice, there's two aspects I would say, aptitude and attitude. Yeah. Law school prepares you for aptitude. Right? It gives you great access to courses,
Resources,
the best libraries, all of that, right? What it may not necessarily prepare you is for the attitude of the knocks you're going to get when you start this profession, wherever you started, right? And so I think that is what, for me, that is what has been the learning in the first few years is, okay, you know, I'm not going to sit there on day one and be the you know, guy getting, you know, the center stage to do it. I might be the guy who's standing outside the door, who's opening the door for people to come in and go out, and then managing due diligence, which is, you know, can be quite dire at times. It's locked up in a small room trying to, you know, put together a binder of documents, you know. So there's stuff out there you will do as a junior lawyer, which you will ask, why did I go to law school for? That is attitude, and that I think you'll only start learning when you start working.
Yeah, we do stumble.
But it's important to have fun while in law school. Just remember that, right?
Yeah.
Shouldn't worry too much about, because the law school can be the fun part of it. And I made, for me, I'll tell you, I honestly say this, I made my closest set of friends in my law school years. In my 5 years I was there, I made my closest friends there. Met my wife in law school as well. So there's good things that come out of being in a law school.
That's really great to hear, sir. We also do catch ourselves in situations where we are like, oh wait, but I want to do something more interesting. Why am I working on this? But then, yeah, like what you said, humility is something we do all learn. So yes, sir, that brings us to the end of our episode, and it was really, really great having you on this episode. Thank you so much for taking out the time.
I also enjoyed this freewheeling conversation. So thank you and all the best.
Thank you,
thank
sir.
You.